Okay, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Safely Extreme Cast, where we discuss game design and industry topics. I am Josh Placer from Game Wisdom, and joining me from Nexus Games is Sharky.
Hello, everybody, and hopefully one day I'll get the new company name and logo.
And it is looking very dreary out here, so hopefully the internet stays up. But this is our first cast for the month of August. We're almost done with the summertime. Are you excited about that?
I mean, yes, but also no.
Is that safely extreme?
Yes. Well, it's extremely extreme on getting my video game done in time. It's it's extremely extreme. It would be safely extreme in normal circumstances, but not this one.
Well, we'll see. I know my book has been pushed back to, I think, right now, tentatively October 6th for the release. So hopefully everything looks good there. I've been emailing the publisher just to make sure things are great. Haven't heard anything back yet, but you never know, right?
So then you're going to get another review on it?
It is, I think, too late for that. It's going to the printers.
Yeah.
And so hopefully they took all the edits I did, or it's going to be very fun to tell people about book number 4. But we have another great discussion plan for you for this week. Our topic is going to be talking about kind of the structuring or implementation of story when it comes to video games. This is a topic where we've seen a lot of developers kind of mess up and shoot themselves in the foot over it.
Certainly have. And, a large part, or definitely part of this conversation, we'll be talking about the new word of the day, the ad continuum. Because there's a lot of things in there with story structures, rather.
But story and gameplay, it's one of those things that I think a lot of developers tend to, I think, overplay their hand on. No pun intended with Neon Continuum, of course. But we've seen, especially from the independent space over the last 10 years, this very big push into the realm of visual novels, quote-unquote walking simulators, games where story is first, gameplay third, fifth, or not even a part of the conversation.
Which is not good.
No, it is not.
You often see that in walking simulators, which I argue that most, if not all, walking simulators aren't actually games. They're interactive movies, which you can find those on the internet, like in video format. Where it's like you skip to this part if you make this choice, skip to this part if you don't, and then it's just like 2 buttons kind of thing that hyperlink you to that timestamp of the video kind of thing.
And I mean, we could even talk about games like what was it, like the old school Dragon's Lair, Space Ace, the whole Don Bluth era, where they were just interactive movies. Thing flashes on screen, hit button, do it right, you get the success cutscene, do it wrong, you get the death cutscene. And in a weird way, those are probably more games than some of the visual novel and walking simulators we've seen over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I remember one specifically, like the old Space Ace and what was the other one?
Dragon's Lair or
Dragon's
Space
Lair,
Ace. Yeah. There was Brain Dead 13, which if anyone remembers that game, thank you for watching this live or recorded.
I never even heard of that one. Was
that
on the CDI too?
Oh, that was on. I played it on the 3DO. I think it was on PC. It could have been on Sega CD as well. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I didn't have any of those at that time.
But the issue that we have with a lot of these kinds of games is that at the end of the day, a good story is not going to retain people over bad or non-existent gameplay. And I feel that this is a lesson a lot of developers have not really grasped yet. That it doesn't matter, how unique your story is, how original it is, how, emotionally driven it is, if it's horrible to play or if there is no gameplay to it.
Yeah. Now I have said something that a good story can make any game better.
Mm-hmm.
But that comes with the caveat of the gameplay being good to begin with, and you implement the story correctly. Because if you just shovel it in nonchalantly, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And certain genres are really easy to put story in, like an RPG, a
Mm-hmm.
visual novel. But a visual novel is really hard to put gameplay into. A RPG is not. But like certain ones are really, really hard to put story into, like a multiplayer only game. That is kind of mission impossible to put a story into.
Mm-hmm.
But
And
you have to be careful on that.
mm-hmm. And the thing I think it's very important to clarify this, that we're not saying that a story first game is automatically bad or it's automatically doomed to fail. What we're saying, like for instance, like Disco Elysium is very much an example of a game that succeeded with that kind of story first attitude.
Which
And
is what I used in my thumbnail.
yep. And incidentally, I looked up Firewatch, which I have not played yet, but if these achievement ratings are right, it actually retained a lot of people, a lot surprisingly than I thought it would, considering that's another very story driven game. But the point about this story should not interfere, downplay, or make the core gameplay loop of your title worse. And
Mm.
a lot of people think that if the story is good, who cares about the core gameplay? This is where we get to a lot of the walking sims. And the thing about this, and this is one of those little rants I could certainly go on, is that a lot of the quote unquote walking sim style games are horrible to play. Like, the movement feels off if there's jumping. It's like almost like it's worse than I think even some of the worst platformers I've played. Your character moves slowly, and it's just like there's no interaction to the world. And I always can tell when a developer does this is that they'll have an open world with like this huge amount of real estate and game space to explore.
And nothing in it.
Exactly. There's no reason to go off the beaten path. There's nothing out there. There's no collectibles. There's no Easter eggs. No, additional lore, story bits. It's just here's this wide open space because we know games are about wide open spaces. But you're going to go here, 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 and that's the entire game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're drawing a straight line in your game for where the gameplay's at, or what could qualify as gameplay in some of these things, and you have a whole bunch of other stuff, yeah, all that stuff is pointless.
Yeah, and one of the things that we see in really good games is when the story is very much integrated into the gameplay, be it through, plot points that influence the characters, which influence what you're doing, or that the story is just, really engaging for what else you're doing in that game.
Yeah, there's also the inverse of what you're talking about, where they put gameplay first and then stories kind of second. And
Mm-hmm.
you encountered that the other day with that game, what was it, Bark,
Yeah.
where the gameplay was interesting and everything, but like you were just getting these random bits of story. It's like, I think there's more story here, but I'm not getting it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And that could certainly fill, I think, another topic talking about games where it's gameplay first, story third, fifth, or zero down at the end of it.
Hmm.
And I guess here's a question for you and for the chat, which I don't see too many people watching live, but maybe for the record form we'll get some answers to this. But what do you think about games that are ultimately gameplay driven, story zero? Do you think they hold up better in the market compared to story 100, gameplay zero?
Oh, absolutely, a
Mm-hmm.
1000%. But at the same time, those games can be good,
Mm-hmm.
but they could be great if they
Yep.
had story implemented into them greatly, because in the end, it is, at least as of, when you buy a game, after you buy a game, it is gameplay first. Now, getting somebody to buy a game is, completely different story kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's, more our other show, Indie Inquiry. But like, when you get your hands on the game,
Mm-hmm.
the main thing that matters is gameplay, UX design, and again, graphical appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Graphical appeal has like so many aspects that it applies to.
Unfortunately, that's the thing. A lot of developers don't like to hear, but it sadly is true for a lot of consumers.
It's what I didn't want to hear, to be
Yep.
honest.
Mm-hmm.
It's still not what I want to hear, but I am adhering to it
Yep.
because I want to be successful.
Yeah. And like I think what you said there is very important that if your game has zero story and amazing, fantastic, game of the year defining gameplay, it's going to be an amazing game. Like there's no doubt about it. But if you can pull off a great story on top of that, that's usually what separates, the amazing games from the masterpieces, the ones that stand the test of time.
Yeah, I would argue that you always can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not individual developers can do that, but it's always possible. And but depending on the game to how hard it is, some games it may
Mm-hmm.
just be so easy it's basically automatic.
Yep.
And other games might be freaking Mission Impossible where you have to steal the Mona Lisa through like 50,000 laser grids and like all these automatic turrets and everything else. And good luck, you've never stolen a pencil in your life. Good
Yep.
luck stealing this.
Here's a really good example of that: real time strategy games and having amazing stories. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, honestly, like, I know people are going to, throw Warcraft or StarCraft at me. I don't know if I would consider those good stories for that kind of gameplay. Like, it again falls in that territory where the story is kind of, on the side of the, next to the gameplay instead of being fully integrated into it.
Yeah, that would be a really hard one. I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head how to integrate story in there,
Mm-hmm.
but I could pretty much guarantee you there is a good way to do it. It
Mm-hmm.
will, like if I ever make one, you'll see me do it. But
Mm-hmm.
that would be a hard one that I could not just be like, yeah, you could just put it in here, 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 and
Yeah.
here, kind of thing. But like, if I had made one at this point, yeah, I could tell you that. But
And if anyone can think of an RTS that has a really great story that actually fits the gameplay, let us know in the comments.
mm-hmm,
And again, where this issue stems from is what Shark was saying, that depending on the genre, it can be either very, very easy or incredibly difficult. Visual novel games, which are mostly story, it's easy to come up with a very well thought out story that can match that gameplay.
it's hard to come up with gameplay in those though,
Yep. And then the
but it's
opposite would.
possible.
Mhm. And then the opposite would be something like a strategy game or a first person shooter or, some high octane action game. And it is one of those things that as the medium has evolved, I think so has consumers' expectations of this. That if they see an amazing game, they want, a good story to motivate them to it. But conversely, if they see, a very story driven game, they want to at least be able to enjoy the interactivity of it. And I think this gets back to what we were talking about with a lot of developers who chase kind of like the one hit wonders, your Five Nights, Gone Home, Amnesia, and so on, where they think that, okay, if Gone Home did this, I'm going to make an equally emotionally, thought provoking story, and I'll win all the awards and get all the money.
Hmm.
Hey, Amir.
Yeah, that's the problem with anybody that says one person did it, so therefore so could I. And we had a podcast, about that a while back about how people are like, Stardew Valley was solo, so I can do a game solo, successfully
Mm-hmm.
and all this other stuff. But like, yeah, I mean, like when you use an example to either justify what you're doing or just purely like, they did it, so
Mm-hmm.
I can copy it and do the same thing, and not likely.
Yeah.
It's highly, highly unlikely. Because number one, even if you were to make Gone Home 2 or any of these other games, Part 2, underneath a different name, likelihood is the community's already played the first one, so
Mm-hmm.
why would they want your second one?
Yeah.
You
And
know,
it, and again, that is
from a different
another,
developer.
and of course, that is another topic in of itself.
Yeah.
But as we look at kind of a lot of these story driven games out there, one of the things that always sticks out to me is that they oftentimes have very poor retention rates, or their churn rates in terms of their fan base is incredibly high.
Probably
And
the refund rates are too.
yeah, like to give you a case in point, when we look at something like Amnesia, what was it, Rebirth, that it goes down. Let's see, where does it stabilize? It actually stabilizes pretty high up, actually like 59%. But as we get lower and lower down, fewer and fewer people are playing these games. And the problem is that if you have this amazing story, but only 10% of the people who bought your game actually saw it, what's the chance they're going to buy your next game?
Probably less than 10%.
Mm-hmm.
Probably
And
less than 10%.
it
Probably
is.
10% of 10%.
Mm-hmm. And things like we've said, like I do on my show, which I think we got a name for it, completion critiques, which I still need to figure out a day and time to do it and schedule around it. That more people, or you're going to have churn. You are never going to see a single video game that retains 100% of its player base from beginning to end. But what you don't want to see is people start a game, they click, begin, try the game for 20 seconds and go, this is horrible, I don't want to play this, and then leave. So it goes from like 100% down to 40% in like less than 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's not good. That's a refund kind of thing. You
Mm-hmm.
definitely don't want to have that kind of churn. You ideally want to have as few um as few churn in the first 2 hours as possible, because that's where you're most likely to get refunds,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to definitely reduce as much as you can that churn, which is yet another reason why you kind of have to front load games to a point. That doesn't mean put all your content in
Mm-hmm.
in the first part. You definitely don't want to do that, but you want to put enough in the front. You want to front load it enough that it hooks a player to keep on bringing them forward to prevent that churn.
Yeah.
And you got to keep on pulling them forward, prevent the churn so that you get, a lot higher percentage in that first 2 hours.
Yeah. But and we're talking about like kind of pacing and structure this week, Pony. But as Shark said, UX and UI design are a major part of that front loading. That if your game is horrible to play from minute one, you are not going to retain people. You're going to lose a huge amount of them who don't want to deal with frustrating design or a horrible UI. Like, to give you an example, like from Amnesia Rebirth, I quit the game that was, what, like about an hour to an hour and a half in. And where I stopped playing was where 28% of the player base quit. And then the part after that, it goes from 72% down to 59%. So, somewhere in those first 2 hours of Amnesia Rebirth, a lot of people just said, nope, I don't want to keep playing this game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it did retain, I think this is one of those points that's very interesting about story and how this kind of motivates, is that if your story is interesting and you kind of get people beyond those initial hurdles, it can keep somebody playing from beginning to end. We've seen very unique and interesting stories in RPGs. And the RPG core gameplay loop doesn't really change, from hour 1 to hour 80. But if you can keep people, on the edge of their seat with this amazing story, it will keep them or it will retain them a lot better than if it wasn't there.
Yeah, story is definitely good at retaining people
Mm-hmm.
because people want to see how it ends, And even if your core gameplay does not change, your story is changing and
Mm-hmm.
it's evolving and changing as you go. So like people are like, what's going to happen next, kind of thing. And that's partly because of the hooks you build into your story. Your story
Mm-hmm.
itself has hooks in it that pull people forward. So you need to be aware of that aspect of writing when you're designing your story because you also have to account for that.
Yeah. And like also, if your story does something different or weird or unique, that's also a really great hook. Like for those of you who watched when I did the DreamHack Beyond games, that Starstruck game, Glitched as well. Like those are two very different games with just completely, we have no idea where this is going to go kind of stories. And that can smooth over a lot of issues or complaints about your gameplay. Does it make those issues go away? No. You will have churn from them, just as we've said. But it will more, or it will probably most likely, once that churn rate, stabilizes, it's going to keep a lot more people invested in it once they get past that.
Well, I think the better way to explain it would be that you have two things that are causing churn,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Well, three things. You have time itself causing it.
Yep.
People don't have time. Time is precious, so time is money. So they have a limited resource of that. So that causes churn. You have gameplay and UX issues that will cause churn.
Mm-hmm.
And you have story issues that will cause churn. And also, but at the same time, the story has hooks embedded into it. The gameplay has hooks embedded into it. And the way you fight churn basically is have enough hooks that
Mm-hmm.
carry people far enough that they get to another hook. Whether it's in the story or the gameplay or both. You ideally want it in both because you want to have as many hooks as you can, essentially, that will keep players going forward. And there's a sunk cost fallacy that you once you get to a certain point with a certain person, they will
Mm-hmm.
carry all the way through the end. And that's the point where you stabilize. Once you've had enough hooks in them, enough, lost, sunk cost fallacy and everything, and enough forward momentum. When we talk about physics, we talk about momentum of things. Where once you push a skateboard kind of thing, it's going to keep on rolling for a certain amount of distance kind of thing. Once you hook somebody and have them go in a certain direction for a certain amount of time, they're going to have that momentum to them. And there's a point where you can get enough momentum in them that it'll carry them all the way to the end. And once you get to that point, you've stabilized essentially.
Yep.
So it's all about getting enough hooks in there to carry that momentum all the way to the end.
And once you have that momentum, this is often why the churn rate stabilizes. And instead of going from 90 to 70, then 70 to 50, it goes, 48 to 46, 46 to 45.3, 45.3 to 44.8. Because the people who have committed to the game, they've, again, kind of stopped caring about any issues that are in your game. Again, like the newcomers, so the people within those first hour or 2 hours, those issues have gotten them to quit. They've already, pulled the ripcord, they've raised the white flag, you're not getting them anymore. But for the fans, the people who have stuck with it, as long as they still feel that motivation, it doesn't matter, or it's very unlikely that any walls or any remaining issues with your game is going to stop them from continuing to play. Like you said, the sunk cost fallacy begins to kick in at that point.
Yeah, but you definitely want to reduce the walls because those hinder the momentum.
Yep.
So you want to remove as many walls as you can and put as many hooks to carry the momentum forward and keep the momentum up for as long as you can, And gameplay, like depending on the gameplay loop, gameplay hooks going forward can be a lot harder to put in than story hooks. Like your typical Mario game and RPG are good examples of that because they're both pretty much the same at the end as they are at the beginning, kind of thing. Because they're not adding any new mechanics generally. I mean, they may add new spells or something in an RPG, but that's not like a quote unquote new mechanic kind of thing. But Mario is implementing new level designs, but that's not new mechanics, and they just, the story in RPG helps carry them through. Now Mario, the story in that doesn't help carry you through, but the level designs and the mastery of those mechanics is what carries you through.
And I want to get to Amir's question as well, because I think it's another very interesting one.
I've seen that too, but I got wiped off my screen, so I don't see it anymore.
What are your thoughts on non-linear stories? And this is, again, this is another one of those weird, avenues when it comes to storytelling in games. And again, this is one of the things that makes video games different from other mediums. When you're watching a movie or a TV show, the story, occupies, a linear timeline. If it's a 50-minute show, it's a 50-minute story. But with video games, when we talk about non-linear ones, where you're able to kind of explore or do things out of order, it's a lot weirder, it's a lot harder, I think, to have that story feel motivating. We see this, I think, in a lot of full-on RPGs. I'm talking the Divinity series, Skyrim, Fallout.
I would call those more sandbox than anything.
But this idea that here's your main story, but you can go anywhere else in this world. Yes, the Dragon Lord. Yeah, the Dragon Lord is going to destroy everything in 6 days, but you can just, wander around and, farm for 3 months. Nobody's really going to care about it.
Yeah, and I don't like that.
Hmm.
That's a really bad implementation of a story kind of thing.
Hmm.
I think you can make a non-linear story though that is really good. I think I've never played it, but I believe that that one Zelda game with the moon crashing down every what seven
Majora's
days.
Mask, yeah.
Yeah, I believe that one had a good implementation. I've never played it to actually know, but from what I've heard, it had a good
Hmm.
implementation because like you had a set time limit. You could only do a certain amount of things. Nothing ever got, you know,
Hmm.
like it didn't make nothing made sense like in the sandbox games kind of thing. Everything made sense because you only had a limited amount of time to do a limited amount of things.
Hmm. And,
But
like,
like there's other things too where it's not. I wouldn't call them non-linear games, but like they're linear, but they're not on rails kind of thing, where they have choices that you can make that will change the story to a point, but it's not going to change the entire story kind of thing, you know, and, where you kind of get these dialogue trees that kind of can loop back into each other, you know. You see this on like time traveling stories, for example, where,
hmm.
you go this way, you make this choice, you go up in that story, and then you find out that everything is going to go awry and everybody's going to die, and then you time travel back and get back on the normal path and then go forward and make a different choice kind of thing. And like, or you just get to a certain ending kind of thing or something like that.
Hmm.
And there's RPGs that have multiple endings kind of thing, and some of those are better than others, and you really have to be careful about branching stories because
Hmm.
like you don't want to cause insane scope for yourself.
Hmm.
So one method of branching that is a good one is where you're, let's say for example in game A, you go to this guy, you make a choice whether to help him or kill him kind of thing, and then that result gets saved, and then the story seems to go on normally forward, but it's actually two different paths, but it's actually the same path because they just kind of converge back into the same path
Hmm.
while saving the results from that. And then you later get to another city in that town, or another city in that world rather, and you run into that guy's friend. And at this point, that friend knows that his friend either, got helped by you or got killed by you, and will then treat you differently based off of that. Either, if you killed him, he might try to kill you, and you have this
Hmm.
boss fight kind of thing. And if you helped him, then he gives you this cool item or helps you actually bypass the next quest that you would have had to go through a long thing to get a key. And he's like, oh, well, I got a copy of the key right here, kind of thing.
Hmm.
And no matter which choice you have, it's not creating a lot more work for you because you just need to save the result of that choice and then implement that later rather than just fork the road and just make two different games from that point forward kind of thing.
Hmm. And definitely some comments there. And the one thing I think Pony said about a minute ago that I want to bring up is kind of like the piecemeal structure. That instead of one grand story, it's a lot of like little more personal stories. And we see those a lot in RPGs where you have, various named or unique characters who have their own reasons for joining you. You can go and help them, that kind of thing. And those very personal stories are another really good form of motivation. That it's more interesting to care about, the five people in your party versus the entire story just being if you don't win, the entire universe dies kind of thing.
Yeah. And Tomo's game. Epic Tavern does a
Mm-hmm.
lot of this
Yep.
because they have a lot of mini stories where, okay, here's a quest and here's a story around it, and there's multiple branching off things, but it all comes to the end of that segment,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever result happens from that, they can have a vastly branching off path without creating a lot of work because it's this contained segment kind of thing that you chose to go on to. So you're choosing which story segments you want to go into, kind of thing. And then, like, each of those segments can branch up as much as they want because at the end, you just get a saved value at the end. Whether
Mm-hmm.
you earn money, lost money, you had characters die, you had characters grow in level, that kind of stuff gets saved at the end, and that's the only thing that matters going from that point forward. But you got the real experience of making your own choices through that branching path during that thing. And see, they have like almost like multiple of those stacked inside of one.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's several different branching paths inside of one branching path, which then goes out to the hub, which in itself is sort of a branching path leading to all those things based off of a progression. And it's really a really amazing way to write
Mm-hmm.
and get where there's thousands of choices, probably even maybe even tens of thousands of choices, and every choice matters to a huge degree. But in the end, all the results are just calculated down into stats and lives and all this other stuff. And and there's not this massive amount of data that you've got to carry forward. It's just a normal save file basically,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have to and you don't have to you know make another game for each one of those paths, kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
because the gameplay just that path ends, that save file gets saved, and then like references to that save file are implemented into the story at later points.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And to another point that Pony was talking about, the when we see that clash of story and gameplay, where you beat the boss, but then the next cutscene you're down on the ground, you lose, or
Oh god, I hate that.
like from like Devil May Cry 3, where the game begins and Dante can take like 27 like slashes to the chest, and then you start playing, he takes 3 and he's almost dead. Like, you have to be, and I think this is one of those things that I feel developers have gotten better at. That the idea that what you do in the gameplay should impact the story and vice versa. Like, if you're, and this is a game where we saw like the very annoying trope of morality sliders in the early thousands, I think late 90s as well, where the story is just driven by these sliders, but it's so easy to manipulate that the whole choices don't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, the choices don't matter, it's just the morality. And I hate
Mm-hmm.
those because like it doesn't even just tell you what morality it is to begin with. So you're like, I wouldn't say either of those things. What the hell do I choose?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like those systems kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But like the what was I going to say? I think I lost it. Yeah, I lost it.
uh, yeah, and like again, like to the Dead Rising example, like people like it when games remember or they acknowledge what the player is doing.
They will remember that,
Mm-hmm. What they
except they
don't
won't.
what they don't like it is when kind of the man behind the curtain has been revealed, like we saw with the Telltale games, where all your choices matter except no, they really don't. Maybe 3 out of the 100 that you made actually matter.
Yeah. So now I remember what I was going to say. Is the whole like you beat a boss and then it dies and everything, and then all of a sudden you're losing kind of thing. An easy way to actually fix that issue
Mm-hmm.
is just have multiple health bars. It goes down to, you take it down to one HP bar, and then it's like, yeah, but there's a different color head HP bar behind it, and then it morphs forms kind of thing. Maybe it goes to the second phase, and then right when it goes to the second phase, it cuts, and then it goes into the cutscene where you lose horribly because it's like, okay, they just powered up, and now they're whooping my ass. Yep. Okay, that makes sense.
Hmm. Or like in a Sekiro, when the first fight that you're supposed to lose, if you beat it, the guy's like completely shy. He's like, "How could I be losing to you?" But then you get attacked from by a ninja from behind, who then like knocks you out. Now, I'm trying to think. I do want to talk about like lore and story and how the difference between the two, but I feel like that will kind of take us maybe to like hopefully or possibly one of our final topics. So, any other points that you want to talk about, Shark?
Well, I do want to talk about implementing, all the implementation and how, like, you can implement it into like the hardest of hard games. And the good example I have is my own game, Neon
Mm-hmm.
Continuum. I'm working on a grid-based CCG that is called Neon Continuum, and it's looking really great at the moment. It's still far from done, but the way we're implementing story into that is a hard one because it's a multiplayer only game and multiplayer only games do not are the mission impossibles for, like, for putting story in there, because nobody wants to go into a multiplayer match of a card game and then they get matched and everything, and then it plays like a 5 minute cutscene, and then the gameplay actually starts, and people are like, "Can I just skip this cutscene?" No, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
Or they skip it and the other person doesn't, so they're just sitting there waiting 5 minutes for the cutscene to end before they actually get them, go into the match, and then the match starts, and by that point they've already quit, kind of thing. And like, it's very hard because, like, you have to know where to put the story at. And, like the example with the RTS, like, I don't know any examples off the top of my head, but there is places you could figure out where to put this in. And the places where I've learned in a CCG and such to put it in, we're putting story into the actual matchmaking system while you're waiting for your match, kind of thing. You you watch a cutscene rather than just a circle going around or a loading bar or whatever. Instead of watching that, you watch a cutscene. We're still going to include a loading bar or something so that you know that the game is not messing up. It is doing as expected. But on top of that, it's also going to be a cutscene where you're going to see characters interacting with each other. You're going to see story. It's going to have to sadly be in small segments, which is going to make it very, very hard to write. I haven't got
Mm-hmm.
to that yet, but the and then we're going to have to implement something into our matchmaking system that predicts how long it's going to take them to get in a match. And if it's only going to take them 10 seconds to get in a match, we don't play a cutscene.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's going to take 20 seconds to load, and we have a 19-second cutscene that is in the queue, only certain story bits would be in the queue because they have to progress through the story, naturally. It wouldn't make sense to skip forward, kind of thing. So, like, anything that was in the queue, there would be multiple things that would be in the queue at the same time. But if there was a cutscene in there that was 19 seconds, then, and they have a 20-second wait time, then we can play that 19-second cutscene at that point. But if
Mm-hmm.
they're like 40 seconds, it's like, hey, we could play this 40-second cutscene, and we'd be favoring the longest times we could get away with in their loading time until until they exhaust all of them, that they can move up to the next, I guess you'd say, tier kind of thing of the
Mm-hmm.
next progression of the story kind of thing going forward. And that on its own is not an easy system to implement at all,
Mm-hmm.
but it is a good way to do it, because not only is it giving them story in the game, and it's not taken away from the story, but not taken away from the game, but rather adding to it, because who wants to watch a loading bar? Who wants to
Yeah.
watch that? A cutscene is preferable any day over that. Although, like, sometimes there will not be a cutscene because there will not be enough time waiting. But again, the we don't want to take away from the game by shoehorning in story, and that's where you really get into trouble with the meshing. Is if you shoehorn in stuff where it doesn't fit, kind of thing, then you'd ruin it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and like another like example of that, like in terms of pacing, like what we see in a lot of action-driven games, where you're able to move around all kinds of crazy stuff. Then the story starts. Your character is now completely stationary. You have no control over it, and all the build-up and the just the excitement are completely squandered.
Yeah. And Party says he separates story and PvP. And when you do that, you end up with a segmented game to where the people who care about the story will watch the story. People who, don't know about it, or, are just mainly there for the PvP, don't get to experience it. So you get a bipolar experience, and you really don't want that from a game, because that can cause infighting in your community. People arguing about how great the story is, and other people will be like, no, it's not worth my time checking out, kind of thing. And
And
really, a lot of those people that argue that would really enjoy the story, kind of thing.
and that's something that happened with Payday. With Payday 2, the original concept was it kind of developed this, long-reaching narrative around the various people. They had a live action, cutscenes and story bits, and they were trying to, elevate things from that point of view. But the problem was twofold. One, the story was completely divorced from the gameplay. You know, it's this high stakes, gotta be really careful in the story, but then we just run around killing 10,000 cops for 30 minutes during the gameplay. And then the other point was, as they kind of dabbled more into, the fantastical, the just completely unrealistic aspect, the story didn't really make sense anymore. They went from four bank robbers and now attacking military convoys, fighting pulling off like $1 billion heists, and it got this like they had John Wick come in at some point, and all this was being trying to be integrated into the story, and it just like fell apart on itself. And you have to be, I think, very careful about that. In that, if your story, like as we've said, like the story has to fit the gameplay, but if you go too far with it, it just becomes like an incomprehensible mess.
Yeah, you have to make everything mesh well. And if everything is meshing well with story and gameplay, mesh the story and gameplay together. Don't leave them separate.
Mm-hmm.
Separate just causes issues.
Yep.
And the other places where we're putting story is like when you go and look at like character profiles or your cards in your deck builder, it will give you a short story, maybe 3 to 5 to 10 to 20 paragraphs, kind of thing, on that character, kind of thing. And you'll get to experience that, and it won't just be quote unquote lore, kind of thing. And it'll tell you a lot about the character and what they mean, what they grow, and also like everything. The story also has to match the art of the characters, because like if you have a really emo design character, kind of thing, and then you put in a story about liking My Little Pony and frolicking around, it's not gonna match well, as you can see,
Mm-hmm.
if so like the art designs and the story to mesh together as well. So
Yeah.
like you really need every aspect of this: the gameplay, the story, the art, the art, the character design. All of that needs to mesh and become one cohesive whole, and you need to build it as a cohesive whole and not segmented. The story's over here, the PvP is over here, all this other stuff. But in a game like this, you would, since we do not want people to, miss out on the story. Like say for example, they got a cutscene or whatever, and during a loading, and they had to AFK at that exact moment.
Hmm.
You know, have a catalog that they can go back and
Yep.
rewatch things.
Hmm.
And have that separate, but don't just separate things on their own. You
Yeah.
know, it does sound like a tall order because like game dev is hard.
No, it's not. It's easy.
Oh yeah, it's extremely easy. Nobody's ever failed at making a game. Nobody's ever failed at game dev
Yeah.
ever.
And to Amir's comment about a patchwork story, this is something that we often see from live service or long running games, where you'll kind of have, your base game is kind of like this one individual chunk of a story, level 0 to 30, 0 to 60. We see this in a lot of MMO games. And then once you hit the end cap or you hit kind of the expansion, let's say the expansion is 60 to 70, we now have this chunk of story. Get to the end of 70, now we have this chunk of story. And then what will often happen is that elements from previous expansions or previous DLCs will be referenced or, acknowledged in future ones. So what you're essentially doing is creating like five or
Chapters.
six different mini stories for your games.
It'd be like chapters in a
Yeah,
book kind of thing.
exactly. Um,
And that's another aspect of what we're doing with
mhm,
Continuum is like every card set that comes out is going to have a different set of characters, at least for the
mhm,
first several of them.
mhm,
And and when you have a different set of characters, different city, and all this other stuff, is going to be a second chapter in the story kind of thing, and it's going to be very very different kind of thing, and you're going to have these things come up, and then eventually you'll go back to the first city you were in,
mhm.
and you'll have a continuation of that story, and all the stories will link together in some way, but not like a total link. It's they're all in the same world, but they're different cities, different characters kind of thing, but characters may travel from one city to another at times.
Yeah. Um, like again, like we go back to Payday. At the start, they were integrating the chapters of the story into the gameplay. That one of the story bits was, their handler got a hold of new military grade weapons. So then that was introduced in the form of DLC and new options. They had this whole chapter about raising the stakes of the difficulty, which then turned into Death Wish mode or masochism mode in Payday. But then, as the game got further and further, the stories just kind of, went all like, it just didn't really make sense. Here's a DLC about now we're using tomahawks and Gatling guns. Because a Gatling gun is the perfect weapon for stealth, right?
Oh yeah. Well, no. The grenade is the perfect weapon for stealth.
Yeah. And we all use grenades in Payday 2 for stealth, just not on purpose when we play that game. But again, what ended up happening was that the people, and I think this is the issue that I know you were talking about, and so we were kind of alluding to, is that when you separate the story like this, when they're not fully integrated, you're going to have people be annoyed at your game for different reasons. The people who are, story and lore driven, they're going to look at this and go, what the hell is happening with this? It just seems like a stupid mess, and they're going to quit. While the other people are like, I just want to play the game. I don't care about, this character having a 50 paragraph backstory when I'm just, jumping around stabbing people with a tomahawk.
Right. You're splitting your audience
Mm-hmm.
essentially by doing that. And you last thing you want to do is split your audience, because that, number one, causes both of them to quit for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, it causes infighting between each other. You have the ones that are fighting about the story's amazing, and the other one is fighting the story's crap, and the other one is fighting this gameplay crap, and the other one's like the gameplay is amazing, and they're fighting back and forth, and you don't want to split and cause the infighting.
Yeah.
The Not like that. Not like that. The audience will not split in that same way. Because you look at any Final Fantasy where the story and the gameplay are implemented together, and people were like, they only split on which one is the best rather than, which one, they're like, well, this one had a better story than this one, but the gameplay was better in this one than that one, kind of thing. So I like this one is my best,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people argue 7 is the best, a lot of people argue 6 is the
Mm-hmm.
best, and I would argue that I'd be on the 7 side, with 10 being my number 2. But like, the fact is there nobody's arguing that the story is shit in any of them. Nobody's arguing that the gameplay is shit in any of them. They're all arguing a preference on which one is better than the other, rather than one part of your game is crap.
Mm-hmm.
And you would you want people to you would rather people argue about which one of your games is better than which part of your game is shit.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want that. And to your other question there about announcement trailer when it's ready. It's nowhere near ready at the moment to go to trailer. I got to get the 3D environments done first before that's, and I've got to learn how to,
Yeah.
and that'll be coming up on streams in the future.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited about a new Xenoclash game. I think Ace Team definitely deserves another, knockout of the park kind of success. I hope that is one of those. And another thing that I wanted to touch on, I guess another final topic, goes back to what we were talking about with ludonarrative dissonance. That idea when the story and the gameplay just aren't syncing. And
Mm.
again, like we've said, like ultimately a bad or misguided story is not going to doom a game in the same way as having a bad or misguided gameplay. But you can definitely see those cracks, especially when developers really push, the video games as the definitive storytelling medium. And
Well, I would say that a story can do a gameplay loop,
mm-hmm,
but it's not as pronounced as the other one,
mm-hmm,
and it's also because it's also kind of one of those things where, like, marketing kind of thing. If
mm-hmm.
you got your art wrong, what else did you get wrong?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And if you got your story wrong, what else did you get wrong? If you got your core gameplay loop wrong, what else did you get wrong? Kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And
So, like, usually the story isn't the thing that takes it down, because the gameplay loop is normally really bad when the story's really bad. But, like, sometimes you get those odd cases where one is really bad and one's not, and one can take down the other, kind of thing. But it's more likely that the gameplay is going to take it down, because the gameplay is what you're interacting with actively, rather
mm-hmm,
than the story, where you're more soaking in, kind of thing,
mm-hmm,
rather than interacting with. And interactions can certainly sink your ship faster than soaking in stuff.
mm-hmm,
So, like, there's probably a ratio there of, like,
mm-hmm.
3 interactions to 1 thing soaking in. So, like, if you have if you have, like, a bunch of interactions, right? but only like a few things off with your soaking in, then you're probably fine. But if you have just a few things really, really bad off on your gameplay loop, but the story, all that's up, it's going to take a lot of story to make up for those few things in the gameplay loop that are throwing you off, because it's weighted in that way, because interactive stuff is interactive.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore it has more pull.
Yep. And like when we talk about games, like I always bring up like the Tomb Raider or the recent ones as an example of this, where on one hand you have story's supposed to be emotionally gripping and she's suffering from PTSD and all that, and then in game she's just running around uh, disemboweling people with her climbing hook or shooting them in the head with an arrow. And this is one of those things where, as the medium has evolved, these issues tend to become more apparent. Again, like if
You're
you're,
referring to Tomb Raider, aren't you?
yeah, like if we talk about Nintendo and Mario, nobody is really going to do a deep dive analysis on, Mario having to save Princess Peach for the 15th time. Now, could the Mario games be improved with a more involved story? Yes, I would argue yes, they can.
Any
But,
game can,
yeah.
as
But,
long as it doesn't get in the way of the game.
mm-hmm. And then if we look at something like as an interesting point, like Yakuza Like a Dragon, which, as a bit of a spoiler alert, at some point I will have to do an achievement breakdown on that game, because if it holds to what I see right now, it may be considered S tier in terms of just how well retained people. But like Yakuza Like a Dragon is a game that its story is that mix of super serious drama about finding yourself and figuring out who really loves you, and then we have guy picks up a baseball bat off the ground, starts imagining everyone's in a Dragon Warrior.
Mm,
But
and that's another topic, but like I just want to hit on it a second. When you're writing, the writing itself needs to have highs and lows, and that's a good example of when you got the super serious part, and then you have these comedic reliefs kind of thing. And you can't have if a story just gets progressively more dark or progressively more action based, each thing is going to be less impactful than the one before it, kind of thing. And you need to have like your game story, the mood needs to look like the stock market. It needs to be going up and down, ping pong and back and forth kind of thing.
mm-hmm.
Because that is something that keeps your interest and maintains it, rather than something that just goes up and up and up and up and up, and there's no excitement in that, because it's like, well, it's this TNT exploded and blew up a car. This bomb blew up a building. This bomb blew up
Mm-hmm.
a skyscraper. This one blew up whatever, and you just have this escalating thing. It's like, I've seen this before, it's just a little bit bigger, but if you have these downtimes between there kind of thing, that shift your mood kind of thing, then the next one is just like, whoa, so you need to have those downtimes before you go back to your next up.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, that takes us definitely to the realm of actually writing stories and narrative that I think would be way beyond for our topic today, since we're already over an hour in. So, like I said, I think my final point, I want to talk more about lore and how it affects storytelling. But any other points you want to wrap up with Neon Continuum?
Uh, I think that's it. But I do want to hit Pony's point about roller coaster is good. Yeah, like if you just had a roller coaster that just kept on going up and up and up, it wouldn't be fun. If you had one that just kept on going down and then down and down, it wouldn't be fun. Not
Mm-hmm.
that I like to begin with, but you need to have your ups and downs like a roller coaster, or it's just boring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the Tomb Raider game is very interesting. I did a quick look at its achievement rate, and it lost a lot of people But the majority of the people who stuck around actually finished the first of the 2013 Tomb Raider game, like not the original. So like again, as we've said, a bad story or a weird story, anything like that, it's not going to take a game from being a 9 out of 10 to become a 4 out of 10.
Yeah,
But
because interactive stuff has far more weight.
mm-hmm,
More than likely, interactive stuff you're going to be interacting with many times rather than just once, kind of thing.
mm-hmm,
You're going to interact with that same menu thousands of times, probably. So like one little issue with that is technically 1,000 issues because you're doing it a
mm-hmm.
thousand times. Where one issue with the story part, you've experienced it once and you moved on. It's just that one issue kind of thing.
Yeah.
And but the interactive parts are more likely to get you more, which is where UX design is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And a completely another topic.
Yep. And then if we look at a game like Undertale, which unfortunately Undertale has no achievement, so I can't review it at all in this regard. But I am very sure that the story of Undertale, especially the characterization of the various people in that game, kept a lot of people invested in it. And I would really be curious to know what the completion rates of Undertale is. But again, that would be a case where, so or good gameplay was elevated thanks to that unique story. And not only did that unique story sell it, but it created a fandom around those characters and around that whole property. So that I know Toby Fox has been working on like a spiritual sequel. There's been, hints and, teasers about it. That all like Toby has to do is just say, here's a new character of my next game, and the internet's going to explode over it. Yeah, it's a nice meme thing to watch. Yeah, I mean, the gameplay it's okay. But, again, it's one of those cases where so much of the things surrounding the gameplay elevate. And this is what we talk about when we say that, a good game is greater than the sum of its parts. That when everything is working in alignment, it becomes a far better game than if you just have one really good element.
Yeah, and it also gets back to the two sets of hooks thing,
Mm-hmm.
where the gameplay is meh kind of thing. The story carried it with its hooks because the story had a lot of hooks, the gameplay had a few, and the story hooks allowed people to carry forward and create a lot bigger fandom because you had two sets of hooks rather than one. But
Mm-hmm.
they had far less and good hooks in their gameplay, but they had apparently a lot in their story.
Yeah. So I think with that, I think that's a good point to jump to my final topic, and we'll see if we can wrap things up maybe in like the next 10 to 15 minutes. And that is discussion of where lore comes in. Because this is something that we've talked about many times before. It's really been given new light with kind of the era of Souls likes. From Software really kind of built this idea up that the lore, that good lore is not the same as a good story. The lore is kind of what's happened before you started playing the game. The story is what's happening while you're playing the game.
Mm-hmm. And also, lore is normally not front and center because it's not quote unquote important. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's optional stuff that you can find on the side rather than the thing you should be focusing on, which would be story if there was story in a game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a game can have both story and lore,
Yep.
and a lot is a good bit of them do. Like you can play an RPG and you'll have the story that takes place in the cutscenes, but you'll have lore at the bottom of items, equipment, all kinds of other stuff.
Character
You know,
backgrounds, all that. Yep.
lore lore is something that can add to a
Mm-hmm.
story, but it's not a story itself. But it can still make a game better on its own without a story in there. But, and I know a lot of people would consider that having a story in a game, but,
It's no,
it's not.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like again, like we say, like Dark Souls has fantastic, amazing lore, but pretty bad stories to them.
There's
And
no story to it.
yeah, and a lot of that again comes with this idea. Like one of the reasons why a lot of people use lore is that you're not playing a named individual. Like your character really has no true investment or impact on the story. You remember we played that Code Vein game where you had these characters having these like they're just emoting and burying their soul to your character, and your character just standing there like this.
Yeah.
Like it's like they're like saying like I love you like a brother, and he's just like the whole Gordon Freeman situation.
Yeah.
And like it's another issue that we saw with like something like Diablo 3, that Diablo has some really great lore to it, but the stories themselves are so divorced from the gameplay and so divorced from the characterizations that it really doesn't matter. Like my favorite part from Diablo 3 was when they're doing the expansion and they're talking about how your character is supposed to be so emotionally torn over the woman who turned out to be Diablo being killed and all that. And I think most people are just like, who died when? What was that? I was busy running around collecting my set piece.
Yeah.
And yeah, Neo 2 as well.
Yeah. I think the story in Diablo 2 is much better.
Yeah. Yeah, like Neo 2, another one where you have characters who are just like, they're like having this whole like emotional breakdown. And your guys just stand there like, what's happening? Like Willem from the first game was probably a better protagonist, even though he like really stood out from everyone else for obvious reasons.
Wait. Neo, is that the one with the androids or is that the other one?
That's the Japanese ninjas and all the monsters. You may be confusing that with Nier. Nier is
Yeah,
the
Nier.
androids.
Nier.
Yeah.
Nier. Yeah. It would make more sense in Nier because they're actually androids, so it would make sense that they have static expressions, but
Yeah, and then in Nier you have a giant death cult that shows up at one point. Like there's more characterizations in all the faceless androids and automatons in Nier than in a lot of other games.
which is funny.
Mm-hmm. And yeah,
I nearly had it.
but the point about this is that when we talk about structure and pacing, that lore does not impact this at all. And we see this in the Dark Souls games, or in just about any Souls like, where, you're walking around, you're exploring this giant place, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a boss. Okay, let's go fight this guy. And yes, that boss can have an amazingly detailed backstory, but none of it really matters because all you did was walk in, character yells at you, you have an amazing fight for 5 minutes, character dies, you win, you move on to the next.
Yep.
Which would
Or
be
you died if you didn't get good.
yeah. Which is the complete opposite of like a Metal Gear Solid or Death Stranding, where you're talking to people for like 27 hours of cutscenes, and then you fight them, and then you kill them, and then you have 30 hours of them talking about how they're about to die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you ring the bells. Yep, that's your that's your motive for Dark Souls.
Yeah, and don't forget to ring the bells on both of our videos.
Yeah, you don't have to fight any bosses unless you want to, for bonus points. Yeah, and again, like the Souls games are very weird when we talk about this. Is that I think they could be improved with just like a little bit more characterization, but then you kind of risk again overstepping the gameplay. But again, it's those cases where the gameplay and the story are just so divorced from one another.
Yeah, and that's again a question on where can you mesh in the the gameplay into the story and everything,
Mm-hmm.
and how can you mesh it in there without making one bad?
Yep. Because the one thing you don't want to do is force a story onto a game where it doesn't need it, and then the whole thing breaks down. Or
Well, it may need the story.
yeah,
You just don't want to force it into the wrong place. You don't want to shoehorn story into the wrong place. You
yeah.
can put the story in there. You just have to find the right place to put it in there without messing up the gameplay. Like what I said with the with Neon Continuum, is we put the story in multiple places, but the main place would be before, while you're in the matchmaking, while you're waiting for your match, rather than after you matchmake. At the beginning, you have a 5-minute cutscene, and then you go into the game, and that would just be horrible if we shoehorned it in that way.
Mm-hmm. And what we saw with Sekiro, that Sekiro of these Souls likes or quote unquote Souls like probably has the most characterization compared to the other games, and one of the big reasons is that you're playing a named character as opposed to having a character created for you.
What's his
Monster.
name?
That's a good question. I don't remember his name from Sekiro.
Is it Sekiro?
Yeah, it could very well be. Oh yeah, they keep saying that all the time. But it's that difference between that and Monster Hunter. That Monster Hunter has a lot of lore, has story to it, but you as the player aren't really connected to that story. Again, you're in the cutscenes, your character is doing something, but we don't know what their motivation is. They don't say anything. They just emote when they see something giant coming at them, or they do this. When they're about to fight something, they just nod at another guy.
Yeah, and that's a real hard difficulty of implementing story into a game where
Mm-hmm.
you create your own character, kind of thing.
Yeah.
The the way I have a game that I have several games I want to make with character creators, and my way around that is limiting the character creation kind of thing to where you select between a few different personalities kind of thing, which will each have their own script, on voice
Mm-hmm.
acting if we do voice acting kind of thing. And then based off of that, give the player a good example, several good examples of how they're going to act kind of thing. And then allow them to, within each one, allow them certain customization. Like this one starts with this base and you can customize it in all these different
Mm-hmm.
ways. You can, this one starts with this base, you can customize it in all this way. And then kind of think of Diablo 2 when you're selecting a character kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
but then you then go and each one of those have customized story, customized voice acting, and they have minor customization. Well, maybe not minor, but customization of that character, but that character as a whole doesn't completely change.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to point out that Pony just spoiled the storylines for Injustice 2 and all the Mortal Kombat games with that with his comment there. Yeah. And it is, I think, as you said, throughout this cast, it is possible to really elevate it in genres that may not normally have done it before in the past.
It's
And if
just
you're,
really hard.
yeah, and if you're like we've said with a lot of stuff when we talk about game dev, if you're the first one to do it well, that sets you up, or that sets you off for a lot of greatness. But of
You
course,
heard it, chat. I'm set up for a lot of greatness.
you just have to finish it all by tomorrow.
Yeah.
And Pony's comment there, that actually brings up my final point. Because, speaking about developers doing something differently, NetherRealm deserves praise for elevating stories in fighting games. Are they the best stories? No, they're not. They do run that situation of, character walks in a room. Oh no, there's an enemy. Let's fight him. And then even if you win, oh no, he beats me in one punch in the cutscene. Now I've been taken captured. But the whole elevation that there's more to this than just it's a fighting tournament. 10 people must fight to the death. And you have full on voice acting, mocap, the whole shebang. It really elevates these kinds of games. But it still has that issue where, the single player is over in this universe, the multiplayer is over in this universe, and never will the two meet at any given point.
Yeah, and that's just segmenting off your audience, and you don't want to do that. You want to segment your audience as least as possible. And the main way you want to segment your audience when you do is through gameplay modes. This is the tournament over here, the tournament mode. This is what's another mode?
Competitive mode, free play. I don't know. I don't know. I don't play a lot of fighting games.
Well, I'm not talking about just fighting games. I'm just talking about like any kind of game.
Mini game mode, survival mode, battle royale. All different ways that you can segment it like that.
Although you gotta be very careful about that because you're dividing your player base, and anytime you're talking about multiplayer game, that is a very, very bad thing to do. Until your game is very, very big, which is the reason why when Neo Continuum comes out, there's only going to be, very limited modes kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Just the straight off, ranked matches and the unranked matches. Which, spoiler alert, the unranked matches are going to be the same thing as ranked matches, just they won't apply to your score. So we're not dividing the community there, just, not counting your score, but the other person may be in a ranked match, and we're counting their score kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And, otherwise they will be the same. It's just, exiting out of your score ability. Where, eventually we'll be adding more modes and everything if we have the community base to support it kind of thing. And I really hope the game does that well, so we can, add in a lot more modes, because there's a lot of modes I want to add into there, and really just, take it up to a far higher level kind of thing. But be careful, be highly careful about splitting your player base.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And this was, I think, one of the areas where NetherRealm kind of failed on. That, all the unlocks and special moves and, unique costume options that you can get in the single player mode, the competitive players completely downvoted that into oblivion. That none of that matters for ranked play, which I understand. So why not have a separate rank or competitive mode for people who want that stuff? Who want to make crazy builds and do experimentations and kind of bring that, deck building or RPG aspect to it. Because as it stands right now, again, what they've done is effectively just split their community down the middle. For you fighting a car. So did Final Fight, right? Yeah.
A lot of fighting games had it where you fought a car. It makes me wonder if Japan has this car fighting series where you just go out and destroy cars.
I'm pretty sure. I think they've had car versus car games, but can you dodge a wrench?
I'm not talking about a car versus car. I'm talking about a human versus a car.
I think that could have been one too. I think there have been cars as fighting game characters in some games. I know there's a bear. Tekken had a bear, and I think Virtual Fighter had one. You fight a marionette. Yeah, Guacamelee did that. Oh, yes, it did. But
the only car versus car fighter thing I've seen is Spy Hunter and stuff.
Or Twisted Metal.
Yeah, Twisted Metal.
Car wrestling. There we go.
Is that safely extreme?
Maybe. But I think that's all the points that I had. So I guess for you, Shark, do you have anything you want to end on?
Not really. I mean, like, I think we covered it pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot to this topic, and it's certainly one that can, if you don't get it right, it can totally ruin your game.
And if you do get it right, it can elevate your game to areas where it may never have gotten otherwise.
And you could elevate it to heights that nobody has ever gotten to.
Extreme car fighting, yeah. And for those of you watching this on the recorded side, let us know what are some of your favorite examples of stories in non-traditionally like story-based games. Like, can you think of a really good story in a card builder or a real-time strategy game, in a racing game, anything like that? Let us know in the comments below. And
Oh, you just give me an idea for a game. What about a racing game? Now
mhm.
the scope on this is insane, but we're not talking about scope here. A racing game where you build your own car within certain modifications and whatnot, and then you're out there and you're dealing with the racing community and whatnot, and having to run from cops and just Fast and Furious Simulator 2000 basically. You know what I
a
mean?
car PG.
Yeah, a car PG.
The Kong Racing Star, I remember that. So, with that said, we are going to wrap things up for this week. So, for everybody watching this live or recorded, thank you so much for tuning in. You fight the
Like
car.
you'd fight in drag races and street races and whatnot, like you do in Fast and Furious kind of thing.
There you go. I think we just invented something. So, as always, if you're interested in watching these shows live, we do them Sundays, starting around 4:30 ET. If you want to catch our Thursday show, we review indie game store pages. Those are Thursdays, starting usually around 3:30 ET.
And make sure you lick the smash button and smash the like button on both Josh's and my YouTube channel. And make sure you join both Josh's and my Discord channel. Links are down in the description for that and a whole lot more. And also, like, come to my Discord and get to hands on with Neon Continuum, what's soon to be a greatness according to Josh. And you can go over to Josh's Discord and talk about a lot of cool stuff over there, cool games and all kinds of stuff,
And tell me how to get good, too.
and tell you to get a job.
Yeah. All right. So, everyone, that is going to do it for this week. As always, if you're interested in the art and design of games, come back for daily discussions here and on Game Wisdom. And until next time, take care.
See ya.